Well, it's that time again, mid-August, a little bit of space to think about the season so far and where it may go towards the end of this year. A friend of mine's got £1,500 on Max Verstappen to win the championship. Put the bet on the start of the year, about 4-1. He's a bit nervous at the moment, got to say. So let's start at the top, by which I mean, inevitably, the championship points with Lewis and Mercedes. It's been a very good first half of the year for Lewis in so many ways. It's also been a curious one for him because he doesn't appear to have had in some races the best car, or indeed a car he can do anything with, and that's obviously been a concern for them. But I think the season has picked up enormously for them since Silverstone, since the advent of the new stiffer rear Pirelli tyre. I've been mentioning that from Silverstone onwards, and don't ask me why. I mean, we're talking about obviously different pressures they run there. We're talking about different rigidity at the rear of the car that will affect roll stiffness as well. But it appears to have helped Mercedes and Ferrari more than it has helped Red Bull. Or look at it another way, it's hurt Red Bull and it hasn't really affected Mercedes and Ferrari. Very difficult for anybody to say in Formula One exactly what is happening there. And no doubt Red Bull, Adrian Newey in particular, will be thinking about the effect of that stiffer rear and how it's taken away some of the relative performance of Red Bull at Silverstone, and then more obviously in Hungary, where even to Mercedes' surprise, they were so competitive. If you look at Lewis's season, it began in Bahrain with that amazing battle with Max Verstappen, which Max appeared to have won. He was in a slightly quicker car and he got the lead, you might recall, coming out of, or going into turn 3, really nice move on the outside of Lewis towards the end of the race. But then he put all 4 wheels off the track and had to give the position back to Lewis, and eventually finished, I think it's about 0.7 behind him. So that was the beginning, if you like, of the Lewis Hamilton Max Verstappen head-on drama. I think you could fast forward then to Imola, where you had Max and Lewis on the front row, and an amazing start by Max. I mean, just fabulous start down the outside, and got the inside run into the chicane and held position there. And Lewis, first indication of really where this was going to go, I think, throughout the year, just stayed there on the outside. And of course, Max perfectly entitled to come across to the right for the second part of the chicane, and Lewis had no option but to go up on the curb, took a big bounce on the car. And yeah, I mean, that was the beginning of it all, really. Spectacular racing and very, very nice passes and moves by Max at that point. Then we got to the Spanish Grand Prix, which was a rather weird start, where, as I've said several times, both Max and Lewis appeared to be thinking, well, I better let the other one go. It was the sort of flip side to what we were later going to see at the British Grand Prix at Silverstone. Neither of them wanted to take the lead, it would appear. Lewis braked early, Max braked early, as he always does, and just thought, right, well, I'll just go through here and take the lead. I've said here, it's easy for me to say it, but I still maintain there's no way Lewis should have lost the lead going into the start of the Spanish Grand Prix. And I think he was a little bit psyched out by noticing how much rubber there was on Max's side of the grid, and that was in his mind, and it was kind of annoying him that Max wasn't going to have any disadvantage from being on the dirty side of the grid, and he was thinking that, and sure enough, Max made a good start. And here we should just say Max makes good starts, period. I mean, Valtteri Bottas, Max Verstappen, in terms of starts, forget about it. Valtteri's not even on the first page. And then there was the French Grand Prix, which is effectively the flip side, if you like, of Imola, where Max, in Italy, Max just perfectly found the grip and perfectly used those slightly slippery conditions. But the French Grand Prix, under sunshine, didn't have the tyres up to temperature on the warm-up lap, quite clearly, lost the front going into, having got the lead going into that first corner at Ricard, and ran wide and gave the lead to Lewis Hamilton, very unlike the Max Verstappen we'd seen up until that point. So that was the first big thing. And then, of course, we got to Baku, where both drivers should have won. I mean, obviously, Max deserved it more. He was leading, had the race in the bag, and then had that tyre failure. And then at the restart, Lewis made, well, I guess it was cockpit error, driver error, got to call it that, going into the first corner of the restart of the sprint, and that was it for Lewis. And neither of them scored points there, and victory went, of course, to Sergio Perez in the other Red Bull. So it was kind of, whoa, what happened in Baku? That was a very difficult moment, I think, for Max, from which Max had to recover. But then fast forward to the British Grand Prix, and I think that sprint race takes on a bit more significance when we look now at what happened on the opening lap of the Grand Prix, because in the sprint race you had a lot of Max doing this, and I think, Lewis Lewis probably thought, what is going on here? I haven't seen Max doing that. In fact, I haven't seen any other drivers doing that for a long time. And yet Max was doing it. And it was kind of a weird thing. He got away with it because he was warming up the tyres and he wasn't changing direction under braking. But I'm looking back now, I'm pretty sure that's stuck in Lewis's mind. And that's why we saw that incredible opening lap to the Grand Prix. This was a Lewis Hamilton thinking, right, Max is going to do something for sure, but I'm now going to be showing who's boss, if you like. And Max made that incredible start again round the outside of Lewis into turn one, which wouldn't have amused Lewis at all. And then as they come onto the back straight, the Wellington straight leading down towards Brooklands and Luffield, that complex section before Copse, Max comes out of the left-hander and just immediately tucks to the left. And I think that was the moment where Lewis thought, yeah, okay, I'm going to go right here and you're not going to be able to move to the right at all. So he's alongside him and they're an inch apart, really, effectively going down the straight. And that was one of the most, I think, breathtaking pieces of Formula One we've seen for a long time. Two drivers of that quality, and inches apart, whatever speed they were doing, heading towards Luffield, probably, I don't know, 175, 180 miles an hour. Very, very impressive. And Lewis is ahead as they hit the braking area on the outside, but Max just does the most perfect, I don't know, do you want to call it a block? It's not really a block. He's just holding his position, but he brakes at exactly the right moment. There's a slight puff of something. Maybe he's locking up a tyre a little bit. I don't think he did. I think he just bottoms out under braking and they go in and Lewis has to give way. But then Lewis does a very good thing. He drops right back behind Max to get a run out of Luffield, the right-hander, the tight right-hander there. And we now know that Lewis has done a really good job at this point of also storing power, and he's got at his disposal more usable instant power than Max Verstappen. That's a storage thing. I don't really understand it, but I think he did a really good job on the formation lap to do that. And he's got more power. He's got a run coming out of Luffield, and he's behind Max, and obviously he's thinking, I can go down the inside here, it's not an issue. The question is, where's Max going to be? And as he moves us to the right, Max moves slightly to the right, and you can see Max thinking, yeah, I've covered him there, and I'm just going to go in, because he does go in at his normal trajectory into Copse. The trouble is, at that moment, Lewis has seen that Max hasn't fully shut the gate, goes down the inside, and the two touch. And there's been a lot of discussion about why that wheel shattered so suddenly on the Red Bull. And there's no real answer to that. There's lots of spurious stories about, was it the illegal material, was it, all these sorts of things. But, the point is it did shatter, and that was it for Max Verstappen. And Lewis got his penalty, and he still won that race, and he still took the lead from Charles Leclerc going into Copse late in the race. Admittedly, with Charles giving him a lot more room and having to run wide, but we've seen that at Copse before. And it's interesting, of course, that Charles was watching those two, and so when Lewis came to make that move, he kind of thought, well, yeah, okay, I better get to the outside. And he didn't really make a big deal about it. He just thought, well, that's what we got to do. So Lewis Hamilton, with that Hungary result, which was a good fighting race for him, although you got to say, had they brought him in on the formation lap, the restart, he probably would have won that race, and they would have lost, 10 positions in the pit lane if they'd brought him in. There would have been a horrendous traffic jam. That's absolutely a given, but it wouldn't have been as bad as putting him out there on the grid as they did and having to drive that lap on intermediates and then come in. So a strategic error there from Mercedes, but a kind of understandable one given all the dramas that go on and having to make decisions very, very quickly. And Lewis made up for it with some very nice driving. And I've described in another video about how good he and Max and Charles are in dirty air. And although a lot of those overtakes were not dirty air overtakes as such, they were helped by having better rubber at the time or a DRS effect. The point is, being good in dirty air allowed Lewis to get very close to the car that was the next target. And that was, and that just shows more than anything else, I think, that Lewis is still the racing driver he was, 3, 5, 7 years ago, and he's just as hungry and just as motivated. So, yeah, my mate with that bet on Max is obviously very concerned about that side of the ongoing season, particularly with, as I say, those more rigid rear Pirellis suiting the Mercedes. From Lewis Hamilton, we've seen a lot of good passes in the first half of this year. But I think from Lewis, we've seen probably the best pass of the first half of the year, and that came around 2/3 distance in the Portuguese Grand Prix when Valtteri Bottas is leading the race and looking pretty good. He's looked fairly good from the start of the race, and Lewis is behind him doing one of these, and they go into turn one, and Lewis just does the most beautiful pass around the outside of Valtteri, and Valtteri's not giving him position at all, and Lewis has to judge it perfectly in terms of when he pulls out, and then obviously he's got DRS, but nonetheless it's a really difficult corner to get right because there's a big penalty if you go over the rumble strip on the exit, and Lewis does it absolutely to perfection and comes out with half the car over the white line on exit of that right-hander and around the outside. I think that was the moment when Valtteri Bottas thought, yeah, right, I think I'm going to be ending up in a Sauber next year, probably driving for Alfa Romeo.